What a crazy Turkish Grand Prix weekend we've just witnessed. History has been made by Lewis Hamilton after what was quite frankly a bonkers weekend in F1. But now the confetti has settled, I can't quite work out if what we saw in Istanbul was brilliant or ridiculous. So I've enlisted the help of Luke and John to try and pick it all apart and make sense of it all. So guys, I'm not even sure if I can remember absolutely everything that happened in that race, so maybe it's best if we start with just a really brief recap. Johnny, what was going on in that race today?
It was all about switching the tyres on. It's been the same problem all through the weekend. We've had this super low grip track surface, which was in the dry. We had, it was basically invisible rain. It looked like they were driving in the wet, but it was literally no grip in the dry on slick tyres. That was Friday. Saturday, the rain came and it was like an ice rink. Same story today. And so the whole race was all about, could you switch the tyres on or could you not? Early phase, the two racing points disappeared up the road. They obviously could switch the tyres on quite easily. Then after that, turned more into a more regular tyre management race. And you either could switch the tyres on, as Lewis Hamilton did, was brilliant, or they would disappear, as happened with Lance Stroll, for example, when he pitted, fell back into the pack and it was game over. So it's been a weekend of tyres, but not the normal sense we get every weekend of being in and out of temperature windows. It's been of trying to get something working on a track surface like nothing we've experienced before.
And during FP3, Luke, I think you and I were talking about how we were a bit worried that going into this race, it was just going to be a bit ridiculous. Cars couldn't even stay on the track. As Johnny just said, it was a bit like having a wet race with no rain. People just pirouetting off into no man's land, going at basically a walking pace, as we saw even before the Grand Prix started today. George Russell said that he was going at walking pace and ended up slamming into the side of the pit entry. So do you stand by your comments? Because Saturday morning you put out an interesting tweet that I believe George Russell even liked, saying that you're a bit concerned that what we were going to get wasn't necessarily good for Formula One. It was more farcical.
Yeah, definitely. So my tweet I put out, because I woke up on Saturday morning and then we had to start with FP3 and I was sort of thinking, it's not really proper, is it? Like, I wanted to see turn 8, who can go flat out, and like the drivers really pushing to the limit at Istanbul Park, which is such a mega circuit. And then it quickly became clear that just wasn't going to happen. And so I tweeted, as much as this could shake things up, so that's with the low grip levels and the rain that was coming, seeing such a mega circuit and mega cars neutered by the track surface sucks. Drivers being made to look silly feels a bit rubbish to me. And as you say, George Russell did like that tweet, so clearly a feeling shared by some of the F1 drivers. But then I think when you look back on what a mega race we've had, I've got to retract that. I have to completely, because I think at times it was a little bit farcical, like particularly early in FP1, for example, when the drivers were struggling, even in a straight line, to go full throttle and accelerate because they were just squirming all over the place because there was so little grip. But I think as they sort of all got into the groove and sort of found the limits of where that grip was, particularly in the race, obviously with the rain as well, I think it was just fascinating. Like, it was amazing to see the drivers really sort of finding the limits of where they could get to, what they could do. And I just think that, I really, really enjoyed sort of the challenge that we saw, the mistakes that it induced from a lot of the drivers. And as much as it may have been sort of a world away from perhaps the flat out high speed Grand Prix that we perhaps would have wanted and expected in Turkey, I think what we got instead was enthralling and fascinating and highly entertaining.
And Johnny, what was your opinion going into Sunday? Because we had a lot of strange activity. But are you agreeing with Luke? But did you even have that opinion going into the weekend, or were you pretty certain that it was going to deliver an exciting Grand Prix?
I think there's disappointment that we've not had the weekend we were expecting. We all wanted to see F1's 2020 cars blasting through turn 8 flat out, and drivers with their necks kind of hanging off just because they can't keep up with the forces, and everything pushed the limit. It didn't happen. But perhaps it went a little bit too far with this track surface with no grip, because it was silly that drivers were having to lift off so much and couldn't perform in the dry at all, and was particularly silly on Saturday morning when Luke issued his tweets. But as it's come round to the weekend, today was a great race. I think, arguably the best race of the season. There was no controversies. It was won for the right reasons. It was won in a brilliant fashion by Lewis. We had a mixed up order, different people, good racing, no faults on that. But equally, you should argue, should Formula One, the pinnacle of teams, pinnacle of technology, the pinnacle of racing machinery, should we have come to a racetrack where 2 weeks ago they resurfaced it and nobody knew about this, and we've been left in a situation that shouldn't really have happened? I think that's the key question to answer.
Luke, what is the answer, do you think? Is there an answer?
Well, I think it's something that the drivers are definitely going to want to review with the FIA to make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen again, because it was all on the track surface, as John said. Pirelli brought the hardest set of tyres that they could possibly have brought to this race weekend, which obviously played a part in the low grip. But I asked George Russell what was the bigger factor, and he said it was the track surface. He said even if you had the softest range of Pirelli's tyres, we would have still had these similar issues coming up. So it was very, very difficult. He said they actually found more grip when he went off track onto the sort of bits of concrete that obviously hadn't been resurfaced. He said that the pit lane apron, which is normally very, very slippery, he said that was had way more grip than the actual track surface. So I think it's something that it does need to be avoided in the future, because I think as fascinating and as interesting as it was today, I think you can't artificially make tracks low grip, because I think that just sort of it's not allowing the drivers sort of push to the maximum of their abilities and really push to the limit and have the confidence they know they should have. And George Russell, he was very passionate about it when we spoke after the race, and he said that it's not what Formula One is about. He said that it was a lottery out there with the tyre temperatures and everything like that. And a journalist asked him and said, well, can't you appreciate that millions of fans watched this race today and thought it was like really good and really entertaining? And George said, if you want chaos and carnage, he said there's plenty of other racing series or sports you can watch, but that's not F1. And I can see where he's coming from that point of view, because ultimately we do want to see sort of man and machine in perfect harmony, pushing to the limit and doing absolutely everything they can. And we didn't see that today, as entertaining as it was. So I think it's something that the F1 drivers will talk to the FIA about. The drivers briefing on Friday, I understand, was very, very short, but literally all they talked about was the track surface and the grip. And I think that it'll just be important that in the future F1 do plan it a little bit better in terms of track resurfacing and things like that. I think 2020, it's been a very difficult season, so obviously you got to appreciate these things. And I think the plans for Turkey, such as getting some series on track to do some running, to sort of rubber in the track a bit before F1 came here, they fell through. I think weather played a part as well, but it was still a situation that in hindsight you would want to avoid, to give the drivers that greater confidence.
I think, while we can't have Formula One tracks deliberately resurfacing circuits so there's super shiny and there's no grip, I think there are some lessons we can take out of this weekend that are positive. I think it's shown that ultimate lap time isn't the be all and end all of Formula One. I think the fans watching over the weekend were more excited by cars on the edge, cars running sideways. They were more excited by today was a race decided by driving talent. Lewis Hamilton's win today was absolute top class. It was a win that, classic win of a great Grand Prix driver coming through and doing what he did. Today wasn't decided by just having the fastest car, as Valtteri Bottas showed. We've seen some good overtaking. We've seen some good battles. No one cared about the ultimate lap time. And as we move towards 2022, I know there's been some concerns that, these new generation of cars are going to be 5 seconds a lap slower. They're not going to have as much downforce. Actually, that's kind of the scenario we had today. We were about 5 seconds off the pace. So if we achieve the results that we had this weekend of cars running sideways, of driving talent coming to the fore, of cars being able to follow each other because the downforce isn't so critical, then that's quite a good future for Formula One, I think.
And I think for a series that has been criticised for being too predictable, maybe even more so this season because of the dominance of Mercedes and the seeming lack of competition, there have been plenty of things in the past discussed about that are rather gimmicky. So, famously Bernie Ecclestone and his sprinkler system, which might have delivered similar results as we saw today. Obviously, arguably this wasn't a gimmick. As we've touched on, it was kind of a bit of a, what do we put it down to? A communication error? There seem to have been a lot of those going on this weekend, in particular. But is this saying there's more reason that we need to find a way to level the playing field, because I think that was the other side of it today, is that everybody had to go into this weekend and relearn how to drive a Formula One car almost. And as you pointed out, Jon, that really separated the good drivers from the great drivers. I actually was pretty impressed with Lance Stroll's performance. He seemed very, very cool. And is he a driver that maybe deserves a little bit more than he currently gets? A lot of pay driver talk gets thrown his way. But is this a scenario where we've actually been able to see real F1 talent shine through?
Yeah, I would say so. I think particularly with Lance's case, I think that, as you say, he does get this sort of pay driver criticism, and I think he, throughout his F1 career, he's sort of had to fight that stigma, is the word that Toto Wolff used for it recently. And that ultimately Lance, yes, he's had a lot of opportunities, and yes, he's been very fortunate right the way through his life and through his career. But when he's got to F1, he's not been miles off the pace. Like, he's been competitive, and I think that this weekend he's really proven that. And his fall through the second half of the race, that wasn't down to Lance really. That was down to the tyres. He ultimately came in for that second set of intermediates, and they started graining immediately. And that's something that a lot of teams, a lot of drivers struggled with, and that's why Mercedes was so worried about bringing Hamilton in for a second time. That's why Racing Point ultimately kept Sergio Perez out and just ran all the way to the end, because they didn't want to go through that graining phase. So I think that's something that I think Lance deserves huge credit for. That I think we saw great displays today from Sebastian Vettel, Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz Jr., Sergio Perez as well. Like, they all really, really impressed. But it is, as you say, like, they could have a 10 out of 10 race weekend and still only finish like 5th or 6th, and that's the kind of thing that I think F1 as it levels the playing field in the future want to change. And there's a stat doing the rounds post-race that Lance Stroll led 32 laps of today's race. He's now led the third most number of laps this season, only behind the two Mercedes drivers. So it's incredible that kind of just one good sort of half race, and already you've got that kind of accolade just because of how dominant Mercedes have been. So I think it does speak to the need for a more level playing field, but also, I think we've also got to recognise the brilliance of Lewis Hamilton. Obviously, a 7-time world champion, holds the record, most poles, most wins, and all of that. That speaks to it. But the fashion in which he won that 7th title today, I think, deserves enormous credit. And I think that he just proved that even today, when he actually probably didn't have the fastest car just because of how poor that Mercedes was working its tyres and getting them in the right temperature window, he was able to still to deliver one of the most dominant displays of the season and take a crushing victory.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get down to it then. The drivers are saying, well, some of the drivers are saying that they're not happy with how the weekend went. The fans are saying it was brilliant. What are the editors' perspectives? Starting with you, Johnny. Was it a farce or was it brilliant?
I'd say it's more towards brilliant than a farce. I think there are some circumstances around it that we shouldn't repeat, like resurfacing 2 weeks before, and we end up with ice rinks as racetracks. That's not what Formula One is about. But I think, on a weekend, you can't call this a gimmick. Gimmicks are where you throw stuff into the mix to try and randomise the order, or you have a reverse grid to try and favour, a team that's at the back or a driver that's at the back to give them an advantage. This was a level playing field. Everyone had the same track this weekend. Everyone had the same opportunity and circumstance, and it was the teams that dealt with it the best that came out on top. And I think nobody can argue that today the best driver won that race, and that's what you should have on every Grand Prix Sunday night.
Luke?
Yeah, I'd be inclined to agree with that. Definitely more towards brilliant than farcical. I think that the drivers complaining, I think they also need to know that this isn't the norm. Like, we don't get races like this every single week, and F1 aren't going to look at this race a bit like it did with the tyres in 2010 when we had that Canadian Grand Prix that was fantastic, and F1 went, we want that all the time. Like, F1 will not look at this race and go, that's what we need every single race. So I think the drivers can sort of have a bit of comfort about that. And yeah, it's just going to be remembered as one of those sort of madcap races that gets thrown into the season and will stand out probably for years and decades to come, similar to Monza this year as well when Pierre Gasly won the race. I think we'll look back and be like, oh, remember when Lance Stroll got pole position? Like, it's a real crazy result. So I think that there's plenty of good things we can take from this. I think it's been a highly entertaining weekend, and yeah, I think that there are elements that F1 will ensure it doesn't repeat in the future, but I think that will happen, so the drivers can be confident this isn't going to become the norm or at all what F1 wants for its sort of future track strategy.
Yeah, I think my takeaways are we definitely need to get rid of Friday practice, because the Friday running and no one knowing what any of the tyres were going to do. I mean, Lewis even came on the team radio today and said, how long are these inters meant to go for? No one had the answer for him, which gives that element of unpredictability, which I think is what made this race so good. It was the fact that right up until maybe the last couple of laps, we had no idea who was going to win this race. There were 5 drivers in it at one point. And we didn't actually know what the podium was going to look like until the last corner of the last lap. And that's everything that F1 fans, us, everybody, that's what we want. We want to be on the edge of our seats throughout the entire Grand Prix, not really knowing how it's going to go, seeing man and machine or driver and machine at the absolute limit. And I think that's what we need. And I reckon get rid of Friday practice, that's going to help. But also how important these regulation changes are going to be to try and level that playing field and to stop outright dominance by the richest teams on the grid. So it's one for F1 to remember, right? But what did everybody at home think? Did you agree? Were you in that category where you thought it was a bit of an iffy one to go into, a bit of a gimmicky race? And have you had your opinion changed? Or did you always know this was going to be a brilliant Grand Prix because it's Istanbul and you wanted it on this calendar anyway? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We'll be giving you tons more video content throughout the week and moving forward for the rest of the season. And until next time, thank you so much, Luke. Thank you, Johnny, for joining us. And we'll see you next time.